I'll never forget the smile on my father William's face that night. A smug, triumphant grin, like he'd planned my downfall years ago. We were seated around the dining table in a lavish mansion in Denver's Lodo District, Colorado, where city lights twinkled through frost-covered windows in the 40 degrees Fahrenheit chill. The hum of guests chatting about the latest Denver Broncos game filled the air. But then my father rested his hand on my brother Ryan's shoulder and declared, "Ryan will take over the company now." Those words hit like a punch to the gut. For 12 years, I'd poured sweat, tears, and everything I had into turning Bennett Logistics from a failing transport firm into a $75 million empire. And now my father was handing it to Ryan, a guy who'd done nothing but crash and burn. I locked eyes with Ryan, his lips curling into a smug smirk, and I knew this wasn't just Dad's call. I smiled back, hiding the storm raging inside, but in my head, I'd already decided they wouldn't steal what I'd built. Tomorrow morning at our headquarters 10 miles from here, I'd show them I'd bet everything on this company, and I don't lose. The dinner wasn't just a family gathering. It was a celebration, a room full of business partners and close friends raising glasses to toast Bennett Logistics' success. I'm Michael Bennett, 36, the guy who spent his entire adult life transforming my father's company from a struggling Denver-based transport outfit into a national powerhouse. At 24, fresh out of business school, my father, William, finally let me step in, but only after I fought tooth and nail for the chance. I didn't just step in, I revolutionized it. From a company teetering on bankruptcy, I expanded operations across 6 states, secured million-dollar contracts, and integrated cutting-edge tech. Late nights, canceled family vacations, relationships that crumbled under the weight of my ambition, all for Bennett Logistics. Now, it's worth $75 million, and I thought my father would see what I'd done. I was wrong. The dining table glowed under candlelight, the clink of wine glasses punctuating the chatter.
If Paul Reynolds, our CFO, was talking shop with an investor, tossing around projections of 20% growth next quarter.
Karen Walsh, a senior executive, nodded along to someone's story, her smile polished and professional. But my eyes landed on Ryan, my 32-year-old brother, who'd spent the last decade bouncing from one failed venture to another. Ryan didn't know jack about logistics or strategy, but he had that flashy charm, the kind that turns heads at a cocktail party. And my father, blinded by Ryan's charisma, and convinced only a magnetic leader like himself could carry the company forward, picked him. I kept my face composed, but inside, it felt like someone had ripped me apart.
"Congrats, Ryan,"
I said, my voice smooth, raising my wine glass. The table followed, the clink of glass drowning out my pounding heart. But I caught my Aunt Sarah Collins' gaze from across the room. Sarah, 58, a retired corporate lawyer, always saw what I'd sacrificed, the sleepless nights, the tough calls. Her look seemed to say, "Stay calm, Michael." But I knew she wouldn't step in. She never did. Ryan met my eyes, his lips twitching into a smug smirk.
Weg.
That's when it hit me. This wasn't just Dad's decision. Ryan had been waiting for this, playing the dutiful son, convincing Dad he was the natural leader the company needed. My father, William, 62, always valued flash over substance. He thought I, with my quiet strategies and behind-the-scenes grind, didn't have the spark to lead Bennett Logistics into the future. But what they didn't realize was that for 12 years, I hadn't just built a company. I'd fortified my position. I'd learned never to trust loyalty where power was at play. I left the party early, driving 10 miles back to my house in suburban Denver. Sleep didn't come that night. Memories of late-night work sessions, contracts I'd clawed my way to win, birthdays I'd missed, they all played on a loop. I'd given Bennett Logistics everything. Sweat, heart, even relationships that buckled under my ambition. And now they expected me to step aside. No way. At 3 a.m., I was in my home office, the computer screen's glow lighting my tired face. I pulled up legal documents, shareholder agreements, contracts I'd meticulously saved over the year. Ryan thought he'd waltz into the CEO's office next week, his name on the door. He didn't know I held something far more powerful, real control. I found the key document, a shareholder agreement from 2015, stating I owned 60% of the company's shares. Dad and Ryan never bothered with the fine print, but I did. As dawn broke, I put on a suit and slipped on my grandfather's watch, a keepsake that reminded me of the value of persistence. It had seen me through the toughest days, and now it would witness me take back what was mine. I drove to Bennett Logistics headquarters in downtown Denver, 10 miles away, where skyscrapers rose against the Rockies. Today wasn't just another workday, it was the start of a fight, and I was ready. I walked into the headquarters, my shoes clicking on the marble floor. Employees glanced at me, their eyes darting away, like they'd already heard whispers of my father's announcement from the dinner. Jake Turner, my high school buddy, and now a mid-level manager here, stood by the coffee machine, but he didn't greet me like usual. I sensed his hesitation. Maybe Ryan had gotten to him, and I knew Jake was on the fence, but I didn't let it faze me. I stepped into my office, shut the door, and took a deep breath. 15 minutes from now, Dad and Ryan would walk in, thinking they were taking over. They had no idea I'd been preparing for this moment for years. At 3 a.m., in my home office in suburban Denver, I sat before my computer, the blue glow lighting my exhausted face. Last night, my father, William, dropped a bombshell, announcing Ryan would take over Bennett Logistics, the company I'd built from ashes into a $75 million empire. But now, flipping through an old document, a 2015 shareholder agreement, I found the key to flipping the game. I own 60% of the company's shares. Ryan, with his smug smirk, thinks he'll waltz into the CEO's chair. My father, blinded by Ryan's flashy charm, believes he's the natural leader. They don't know I've been preparing for this moment for years. Not because I doubted them, but because I know power isn't given, it's taken. Out there, the 40 degrees Fahrenheit Denver chill blankets the city, but inside me, a fire's burning. This morning, at our headquarters 50 miles away, I'll walk into a fight to keep what's mine. No way in hell I'm letting them steal it. I snapped my laptop shut, rubbing my tired eyes. The house in suburban Denver was silent, save for the wind whistling through the windows and the 40 degrees Fahrenheit October chill. My grandfather's watch ticked on my wrist, a reminder that time waits for no one. Last night, at the low-do dinner, my father had detonated a bomb in my life, declaring Ryan the new CEO of Bennett Logistics. But instead of drowning in anger, I chose action. The 2015 shareholder agreement I'd just found was my weapon. It stated clearly, any leadership change, like naming a new CEO, needed approval from all majority shareholders. With 60% of the shares, I held the power. Dad and Ryan never bothered with the fine print, but I did. I stood, brewing a cup of strong black coffee, the kind Denverites grab at shops along the Platte River. My mind ran through the steps, double-check the documents, contact my Aunt Sarah Collins, and prep for the showdown at headquarters. Sarah, 58, a retired corporate lawyer, was the only family member who understood the value of my work. I texted her, "Aunt Sarah, I need advice on a shareholder agreement. Can you call me this morning?" She replied instantly. 7 a.m., Michael. Stay calm. Her steadiness grounded me. At 6 a.m., I drove 50 miles to Bennett Logistics headquarters in downtown Denver. The Rockies loomed faintly in the dawn, a reminder that everything here fights to survive. The company's headquarters, a sleek glass building, stood tall amid craft breweries and trendy shops. But today, the vibe inside was off. As I walked in, my shoes clicking on the marble floor, I felt the silence, the kind that signals a storm. Employees avoided my gaze, some whispering, as I passed. Word of my father's dinner announcement had spread like wildfire. They didn't know whose side to pick. I paused at the reception area, where Jake Turner, my high school buddy, and now a mid-level manager, held a coffee. Jake, 35, was someone I'd always trusted, but this morning, he gave a half-hearted nod. "Hey Mike," he said, his voice flat. I raised an eyebrow. "Everything cool, Jake?" He shrugged, eyes darting away. "Just heard some stuff, you know." I got it. Ryan, with his silver tongue, had probably gotten to Jake, planting doubts about my leadership. I flashed a small smile. "Don't buy everything you hear," I said, moving on. Jake would have to decide for himself, but I didn't have time to sway him now. In my office, I called Sarah. "I found the shareholder agreement," I said, keeping my voice low. "I own 60% of the shares. They can't push me out." Sarah paused, then replied, "Good. But be careful, Michael. Your father and Ryan won't let this slide. They'll lean on the board and employees. You need to move fast." I nodded, though she couldn't see. "I know, thanks Aunt Sarah." The call ended, and I opened my computer, double-checking the documents. Everything checked out. My original 35% stake, plus 15% Dad signed over in 2017 for an expansion, and another 10% from a 2019 legal battle he never reclaimed. I had the power, but I needed to use it at the right moment. The atmosphere at headquarters grew heavier. Paul Reynolds, the CFO, knocked on my door. "Michael," he said, his tone cautious. "There's talk about the transition. People are worried." Paul, 45, was loyal but hated risk. I met his eyes. "Paul, you think I'd let this company fall to someone who can't run it?" He hesitated, then nodded. Just want to make sure we're solid. I smiled. We're solid. Do your job. Paul left, but I knew he wasn't fully in my corner yet. I stood, gazing out my window at Denver's bustling streets, where the morning crowd geared up for the day. I thought about Dad and Ryan. Dad, with an ego bigger than the Rockies, probably thought I'd fall in line. Ryan, with that smug grin, was likely on the phone with executives, painting himself as the company's savior. But they didn't know I was ready for this fight. I hadn't just built Bennett Logistics. I'd turned it into my fortress. I sat at my desk, pulling up the shareholder agreement on my screen. 15 minutes from now, Dad and Ryan would walk in, confident they were taking over. They didn't know I'd made this office a battlefield. And I never step into a fight without a plan. I took a deep breath, adjusted my tie, and waited. The storm was coming, and I'd be the one standing when it passed. The door to my office swung open, and my father, William, strode in with Ryan, both radiating sky-high confidence. They thought today was the day they'd officially take over Bennett Logistics, the $75 million empire I'd built from the ground up. Ryan, in a sharp navy suit, flashed the same smug smirk he'd worn at the Lodo dinner last night. My father, with the air of a king surveying his kingdom, looked at me like I was just a pawn to be moved. But they didn't know I'd turned this room into a battlefield, and I held the trump card 60% of the company's shares. Outside the window, the Rockies loomed in Denver's 40 degrees Fahrenheit chill, but inside me, a fire burned. They walked in, expecting me to bow, but today, I'd make them see who really calls the shots in this game. I sat behind my desk, leaning back in my leather chair, the morning light from downtown Denver's skyline streaming across the computer screen in front of me. Outside, the Rockies stretched high, hazy in the 40 degrees Fahrenheit October chill. My office, with its polished hardwood floors and a view of the bustling city streets, was the heart of Bennett Logistics, the company I'd transformed from a failing transport outfit into a $75 million powerhouse. But this morning, this room wasn't just a workplace. It was a battleground, and I was ready. The door flew open, without my response to the knock. My father, William, 62, marched in with an air of authority, as if he still ran the show. Ryan, 32, followed, decked out in a navy suit, the smug smirk from last night's dinner still plastered on his face. They thought I'd meekly hand over the company, that I'd bow to my father's decision, picking Ryan, the flashy showboat, just because he had the charisma Dad thought the company needed. They were dead wrong. Michael, my father said, his tone carrying the weight of a favor as he spoke my name. I assume you're aware of the transition happening today. Transition, I echoed, feigning surprise, leaning back in my chair. Interesting choice of words. My father's brow furrowed, unaccustomed to my defiance. Ryan crossed his arms, his smirk widening. Don't make this difficult, Michael, he said, his voice dripping with condescension, like he was doing me a favor. We're trying to keep this smooth. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached for the remote and pressed a button. The large screen on my office wall lit up, displaying a document, the shareholder agreement, signed August 17, 2015. Signatories, Michael Bennett, William Bennett, Ryan Bennett. My father froze, his eyes flicking to the screen. Ryan frowned, clearly clueless about what was coming. Ryan, I said, my voice calm, do you even know what this is? He shrugged, his confidence a thin veneer. Shareholder agreement, I guess. I nodded. Exactly. And do you know what it says? I zoomed in on a critical clause. This was drafted when the company restructured. It clearly states, any transfer of executive power, like appointing a new CEO, requires the approval of all majority shareholders. I locked eyes with my father. And Dad, I own 60% of the company's share. Silence. A suffocating silence, like the air had been sucked out of the room. My father's face paled, and Ryan stepped forward, staring at the screen. No way, he muttered, his voice starting to shake. Very possible, I replied, my tone smooth. While you were busy bombing one startup after another, and Dad was playing the big shot patriarch, I was doing something else. I leaned forward. I was securing my place. I turned to my father. Remember 2017, when we needed capital for expansion? You signed over 15% of your share for my investment. And in 2019, during that legal battle, another 10% went to my name as collateral. You never bothered to reclaim it. Add that to my original 35%, and I'm the majority shareholder. Ryan snatched a printed copy of the document from my desk, scanning it, his face draining of color. You're bluffing, he snapped, turning to my father. Dad telling me can't do this. But my father stayed silent. He knew I'd outmaneuvered them legally. And there was no way out. I stood, walking slowly around the desk, my voice still calm. I'm not firing you, Ryan, I said. I wouldn't want to throw you into the real job market, but you'll work under me. You'll report to me. If not, I gestured to the door. You're free to go. Ryan's eyes darted to my father, pleading. But for the first time, my father had no answer. He stood there, rigid, like he was searching for an escape. There wasn't one. I'd prepared too well for this moment. You're making a mistake, Michael, my father finally said, his voice tight, but still trying to hold authority. Family sticks together. Do you really want to burn this bridge? I met his gaze, unflinching. Dad, you burned that bridge when you made your decision without me. Ryan clutched the document, his fingers white from gripping it. You think you can just take everything? He spat. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. Take? Ryan, I built this company from nothing. Every contract, every expansion, every innovation. I made it happen. While you were failing upward, I was keeping this company alive. I'm not taking anything. I'm keeping what's already mine. Ryan spun and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. My father lingered a moment longer, as if waiting for me to back down. When I didn't, he gave a slow nod. You've changed, he said, his voice low. No, Dad, I replied. I just stopped pretending. He walked out, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. I sank back into my chair, staring out the window at Denver's gray skyline. I should have felt victorious. I'd fought for my place and won. But as I looked at the empty doorway, I felt a quiet ache. Part of me had once craved my father's approval, but now I knew he'd never truly seen me. And now he had no choice but to face the truth. I was the real leader of Bennett Logistics. Paul Reynolds, the CFO, stood just outside the door, clearly having overheard the whole exchange. Michael, he said, his tone cautious. It's gonna stir up trouble. I know, I replied, my eyes still on the screen. But they started this fight. Jake Turner was there too, near the doorway, his expression caught between shock and hesitation. I knew Ryan had tried to sway him, but this moment, seeing me take control, might have tipped Jake toward my side. I didn't say anything to him. He'd have to decide for himself. I pulled up the document on my computer again, reviewing the next steps. Today's win was mine, but I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Ryan would come back swinging, and my father wasn't one to walk away quietly. This fight was just beginning, and I'd make sure my fortress was stronger than ever. I sat in my office, the Windows light spilling across my computer screen, where my father's press release glared back at me. Bennett Logistics has always been a family-run business. We are saddened by recent developments, but remain committed to upholding our core values. Leadership changes are inevitable, and we hope for a smooth transition. The words were polished, but I saw through them. Michael's reckless. Michael's uncooperative. Michael's a disaster. I wasn't surprised, but damn, I was pissed. Outside, Denver buzzed under the 40 degrees Fahrenheit October chill, the Rockies standing tall like a reminder that everything here fights to survive. Bennett Logistics headquarters, 5 miles from Lodo, was my fortress, but it was shaking. After yesterday's office showdown, where I revealed my 60% shareholder stake to keep control, I knew my father and Ryan wouldn't stop. They'd shifted the battle to public opinion, where my father, with decades of image crafting, was a master manipulator. I stood, pacing to the window, looking down at the bustling streets. Craft breweries and trendy shops dotted downtown Denver, but inside the company, the air was tight as a drum. Employees whispered, their eyes dodging mine. The board, especially folks like Tom Garrett, a board member, was starting to waver. I knew Ryan had been working the phones, meeting them at upscale bars, spinning tales of my betrayal. My father only needed to sigh, drop lines like I just wanted the best for my kids, to sow doubt about me. That afternoon, I called an emergency board meeting in the headquarters conference room. The polished wood table reflected the light, but the mood was heavy. Karen Walsh, a senior executive, sat rigid, avoiding my gaze. Tom Garrett tapped his pen on the table, visibly agitated. Paul Reynolds, the CFO, shot me a wary look. I knew Ryan's rumors had sunk in, and Jake Turner, my old friend, still hadn't picked a side. He sat at the far end, eyes glued to his papers, like he was afraid to face me. Let's cut the crap, I said, standing at the head of the table, my voice calm but razor sharp. I know there've been conversations behind my back, over drinks, in hushed corners. I paused, locking eyes with each person, letting them feel the weight of my stare. I also know, some of you are wondering if I can lead this company long term. No one spoke. Karen shifted in her seat. Tom stopped tapping his pen. I pressed on. Let's clear that up. I flashed a presentation on the screen. Numbers, charts, facts. I took this company from a regional nobody to a $75 million industry leader. In the last 5 years, under my leadership, revenue's up 300%, and we've expanded into 6 new markets. I turned to Paul. Do we have a single financial metric saying this company's in trouble? Paul hesitated, then shook his head. Oh, projections show 20% growth next quarter. I nodded. So let's be real about what's going on. My father and Ryan aren't mad because the company's struggling. They're mad because I wouldn't step aside for Ryan, no matter how unqualified he is. The room was dead silent. Then I dropped the bomb. I also know some of you got calls in the last 24 hours, offered incentives to push for my resignation. I tilted my head. Anyone want to come clean? Now's your chance. Tom Garrett cleared his throat, his voice shaky. I got a call from your father. He said he's considering a formal appeal to the board. I nodded, unsurprised. And what did he offer for your support? Pause, then a slow nod. That was all I needed. I stood taller, my voice dropping. Dangerous. My father built this company, I won't deny that. But I took it further than he ever could. And I won't let him pull strings from the outside. I gathered my papers, eyeing each person. If anyone thinks my father and Ryan deserve control, now's the time to make your move. No one budged. I walked out, head high. That night, at a craft brewery 2 miles from headquarters, I called Laura Mitchell, an investigative journalist I'd known since college. Laura, I said, I've got something for you. You need to move fast. An hour later, I sent her a trove of files, documents, financial reports, internal records, proof that Bennett Logistics, under my father's watch, had dabbled in shady deals I'd spent a decade cleaning up. 24 hours later, Laura's article hit every major Denver outlet. Headline: Behind the Scenes at Bennett Logistics. A Legacy of Hidden Debts and Financial Cover-Ups. The piece praised my leadership for fixing the company's finances, slammed my father's past mismanagement, and proved I was the only reason the company survived. That strike changed everything. The board stopped doubting. Investors stopped hesitating. And my father, he had nowhere to hide. Jake Turner knocked on my office door the next morning. Mike, he said, meeting my eyes for the first time all week. I was wrong. Ryan called me, said you weren't cut out to lead. But after yesterday, I'm with you. I nodded. No smile. Thanks, Jake. But next time, pick the right side from the start. He nodded and left, and I knew he wouldn't waver again. I looked out the window, feeling the growing chasm with my family. I'd regained control, but at what cost? My father and Ryan were now open enemies, and though I'd won this round, the ache of losing family lingered. But I wasn't stopping. Bennett Logistics was mine, and I'd make it untouchable. 6 months after I outplayed my father and Ryan in the public relations war, I stood in my newly renovated office at Bennett Logistics, looking out over Denver under a 60 degrees Fahrenheit spring sun. I'd just fired 3 executives who'd wavered under my father's pressure, replacing them with fresh faces, people who believed in my vision. I should have felt victorious. I'd saved the company, pushing it from a $75 million empire to a $100 million milestone. But staring at the Rockies, I felt an emptiness. The cost of this win was heavier than I'd expected. My family was now a collection of strangers. My father, William, had retreated. Ryan vanished after cashing out his shares. I'd won everything, but lost something that once mattered. Still, I wasn't stopping. Bennett Logistics was mine, and I'd make it untouchable. I stood in my revamped office at Bennett Logistics headquarters, downtown Denver, 5 miles from Lodo. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows open to a panoramic view of the Rockies, shimmering in the April sunlight, a comfortable 60 degrees Fahrenheit outside. 6 months ago, I'd turned the tables using my 60% shareholder stake to keep control and a bombshell article to crush my father and Ryan's schemes. Now the company wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. But as I looked down at the bustling streets, where craft breweries and new tech hubs dotted the city, I felt a quiet loneliness gnawing at me. I'd moved fast after the media war. Executives like Tom Garrett, who'd been swayed by my father, were gone. I brought in new blood, young, innovative, and most importantly, loyal to my vision. I modernized operations, rolling out systems my father once called unnecessary. Supply chain software, AI to optimize routes. The results? Revenue skyrocketed, and within 6 months, Bennett Logistics hit the $100 million mark, a milestone my father never dreamed of. But this victory didn't taste as sweet as I'd hoped. Every decision, every reform, reminded me of the cost. My father, William, had retreated, selling off most of his shares and fading from my life. Ryan, after pocketing his buyout cash, was nowhere to be seen. My family, once a cornerstone, was now just a memory. I'd won, but at the price of isolation. I met my Aunt Sarah Collins at a craft brewery 2 miles from headquarters, where the scent of barley and soft acoustic music set the quintessential Denver vibe. Sarah, 58, with the sharp eyes of a retired corporate lawyer, studied me over her IPA. "You've done well, Michael," she said, her voice low. "But are you happy?" I sipped my beer, weighing her word. "I don't know, Aunt Sarah. I've got everything I wanted. The company, the power. But sometimes, I wonder if it was worth it." Sarah tilted her head. "Family's never easy. Your father was wrong to pick Ryan, but he's not a villain. He was blinded by his ego, thinking Ryan was a younger version of himself. You proved him wrong, but don't let this win turn you into someone like him." Her words hit hard. I'd always thought I was fighting for justice, but was I becoming someone who only cared about power? I nodded, staying silent, but that conversation planted a seed in my mind. Back at the company, I doubled down on reforms. I invested in a new tech hub in Denver, tapping into the city's startup wave. Paul Reynolds, the CFO, now a close ally, reported that investors were lining up to partner with us. "Michael," he said, in a meeting, "this company's never been stronger. You've pulled off the impossible." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Thanks, Paul, but we're not done yet." Jake Turner, who'd once wavered under Ryan's influence, was now one of my most loyal. During a restructuring project, he volunteered late hours, pitching ideas that saved millions. "I want to make things right, Mike," he said. One evening, as we stood outside headquarters, watching the sunset paint the Rockies gold, "I screwed up doubting you." "Forget it, Jake," I replied, clapping his shoulder. "You're here now, that's enough." Jake nodded, and I knew he'd never turn his back again. One evening, I sat in my office, staring at my grandfather's watch on the desk. It had been a symbol of persistence, carrying me through the toughest days. But now, with the company hitting $100 million, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I'd outgrown my family's legacy, built something of my own. I picked up the watch, opened a drawer, and tucked it away, a small gesture. But to me, it was liberation. I wasn't the guy begging for approval anymore. I was Michael Bennett, the head of Bennett Logistics, and no one could take that from me. But as the sunset bathed Denver in gold, I felt the loneliness cut deeper. I'd reclaimed the company, but lost my family. Sarah was right, this win came at a cost. I knew my father, though retreated, was still watching from afar. And Ryan, though gone, might be plotting something. This fight wasn't over. But I was ready for the final step, facing my father one last time. Not to fight, but to find peace. I picked up my phone and texted him. "We need to talk. Next week, dinner in Lodo." I didn't expect an apology, but I needed to close this chapter as Bennett Logistics was mine, and now I'd build it my way. 1 year after my battle to reclaim Bennett Logistics, I sat across from my father, William, in a quiet restaurant in Denver's Lodo district. He looked older, his eyes weary, as if the weight of everything had finally settled on his shoulders. Under the warm glow of the lights and the mild 70 degrees Fahrenheit October evening, I felt no anger or resentment. I'd won, the $100 million company was proof. But looking at my father, I wanted one thing, peace. He'd tried to push me aside, choosing Ryan for his flashy charm. But I'd proved him wrong. Now, in the familiar embrace of Denver, I was ready to close this chapter, not with triumph, but with forgiveness for myself. I raised my glass, waiting to hear what he'd say. The restaurant in Lodo, 2 miles from Bennett Logistics headquarters, was a cozy slice of Denver, with exposed brick walls and soft amber lighting. Outside, the 70 degrees Fahrenheit evening felt pleasant, and the glow of skyscrapers reflected off the Platte River. A year ago, I'd stood in my office, facing down my father and Ryan, using my 60% shareholder stake to keep the company I'd built. 6 months ago, I'd pushed it to a $100 million milestone, firing traders and modernizing everything. But tonight, sitting across from my father, I didn't want to rehash victories. I wanted closure. My father, William, 63, looked different. His hair was grayer, his shoulders slouched, as if he'd lost the charisma that once drove him to pick Ryan, the younger version of himself, over me. He held his wine glass, his eyes flicking to me, then down to the table. "I read about your latest deal," he said, his voice low. "Smart move." I smirked, a faint smile. "I know." He chuckled softly, a fleeting smile, the first without a hint of tension. "You've done things I didn't see coming," he said, pausing, as if weighing his next words. "I underestimated you, Michael." That admission wasn't an apology, but for me it was enough. I nodded, sipping my wine. "You weren't the only one," I replied, "but I learned I don't need approval to keep going." We talked about the company, not as enemies, but as two people who'd once shared a dream. I told him about the new tech hub in Denver, the soaring revenue, the investors lining up. He listened, nodding, occasionally asking sharp questions I remembered from when he ran things. But there was no bitterness, no arguments, just an acceptance that I'd gone beyond what he'd ever imagined. "What about Ryan?" I asked, my tone even. My father sighed, rubbing his temple. "He's gone. Took the buyout money and disappeared." "I don't know where he is." I nodded, unsurprised. Ryan never had the strength to stand on his own. When he lost, he did what he always did: ran. But hearing it from my father, I felt a pang of sadness, not regret, but the finality of an era. I raised my glass. "To Bennett Logistics," I said. My father clinked his glass against mine, his eyes softening. "To Bennett Logistics," he echoed. In that moment, I felt true peace, not because my father had acknowledged me, but because I no longer needed him to. I'd fought, reclaimed the company, and built it my way. Now I was free, not from my father, but from the expectations that once bound me. Back at headquarters, a few days later, I stood in my office, gazing at Denver's skyline. The skyscrapers gleamed, and I thought about this journey. Jake Turner, now one of my most loyal, had just pitched a new project, proving his worth. Paul Reynolds reported revenue growth, and employees once avoiding my gaze now looked at me with respect. The doubters, like Tom Garrett, were gone. I'd done what no one expected, turned Bennett Logistics into a force no one could touch. But sitting at my desk, I thought about the lessons from this journey. Family can be your biggest enemy. Loyalty isn't guaranteed, and power isn't given, it's taken. Most importantly, I learned the best way to prove your worth is to stop seeking validation and build something so strong it can't be ignored. I had no regrets. Bennett Logistics was mine, and I'd make sure no one forgot it. As the sunset draped Denver in gold, I felt lighter. I'd found peace, not because of the win, but because I'd become the man I wanted to be. A leader, a free man. Thank you and call to action. Thanks for sticking with my story, folks. If you love this journey, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss more stories of justice and self-liberation like this one. Drop a comment. What did you think about how I took back the company? Let's connect in the next video.